Hello, welcome to a Cross the Park podcast with myself, Ian Mills, and Andrew Price. It's a special edition of a Cross the Park podcast with a friend of the show. People know him as the Esk on Twitter. There's a very good reason why we've got him on, I think you can imagine. But first of all, Paul, thanks for coming back to us. Happy New Year, and how are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thanks. I thought you were going to get me to sing Spirit of the Blues then.
we do try sometimes, but I maybe don't think now is quite the time. Maybe at 1:30 on Saturday, you'll have me singing it with a bottle of Coors Light outside the ground, but maybe not quite yet. Myself and Pricey, I'm delighted to have you on. I think it's quite obvious why we do have you on. You were on the show this time last year when there was a campaign. It was called the 27 campaign. Rightly or wrongly, we always say in the show, no one's wrong, everyone's right to their opinion. But rightly or wrongly, it was diverse, it's split opinion from the fan base. And you've sort of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe rebranded, that there's a new name, NSNOW or NS Now, as I think I heard Zach say over on Toffee TV. First question I've got, Paul, really is this a replacement for the 27 campaign? Is this campaign wanting the same message? Are there any changes? And if so, what?
I think the campaign, the 27 campaign served a purpose at the time. And it was a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for many Evertonians. And yes, it was a bit divisive, and it wasn't supported wholly across the Everton fan base. I acknowledge that totally. I think at the time, most people were still prepared to give Fahad Moshiri the benefit of the doubt. So many people said to me, why are you campaigning against him, or why are you campaigning to speak to him when he's put so much money into the club, when he's building a brand new stadium for us? And I think that was the big things that people were hanging on to, that, okay, things went great on the pitch, as we all know, but we survived the season. And yes, anybody that drives through North Liverpool can now see the stadium as it's being built. And of course, people point to the amount of money that was spent on the pitch. I think it's changed a lot since then. And I think actually the Brighton game, particularly the second half, the first sort of 10 or 15 minutes of the second half, sort of become a defining moment for the club and for the fan base. I think any fallacy that we might be in a better place than we thought we were just disappeared at that game, at the Brighton game. And it's remarkable the change in approach from other supporters now. I think a lot of supporters are recognizing that there are fundamental problems with the club, and the idea that we go to Moshiri is because he hasn't fixed the problems that exist within the club. So a lot of people will recognize that perhaps the board isn't as good as they thought they were, isn't as good as they told everybody that they were. But our point is that the board are never going to change themselves. The board, nobody on the board is going to willingly resign. Bill Kenwright isn't, Denise Barrett-Baxendale won't, and most of the executive probably won't neither. Our point is that Fahad Moshiri, as the owner of the club, as the person who's put the money in, as ultimately the person that might get a return at some point in the future, he's the one that should be doing something about it. So whereas last year we were asking him to talk to us and engage and act, we've gone way beyond that now. I mean, he talked a little bit. He sent 2 or 3 open letters to us, and Denise Barrett-Baxendale speaks more frequently now, albeit in a heavily scripted letter that appears in the programs. But it's gone beyond just talking. Now it needs action, and that action, we think, and over 75 supporter groups have signed that letter. More than 300 in total have signed the letter now. What we're asking for is fundamental change in the business, i.e. change of the chair, change of the board, and change of the executive. And it's only Fahad Moshiri that can deliver that.
I mean, I agree with you, Paul, in terms of people would always go back to Moshiri and say he's put the money in, and I was critical of him before before this time last year when the 27 campaign came out, and I'm always of the opinion just because he's put the money in doesn't necessarily mean he's doing a good job, and he can't always stand behind that. So I agree something needs to be said. We need to let him know and let the board know that we're unhappy and we're upset with the way things are going. I'm totally on board with that. Things have slightly, the board hasn't changed, but there has been changes from this time last year. I think there was an internal review with looking at the football structure, and Thelwell's come in, and we've got a younger manager, a more up and coming manager who tried to suit that new model that we were looking at. How do you feel about that? Does that not tell you that Moshiri has had a go at trying to do something, and maybe it'll take time for that to fruition, or is that just a little too late for you?
Had it been an independent review, so had it been somebody like, I don't know, Tim Cahill coming in and him being in charge of the review and him being totally objective because he wasn't part of what was before, or somebody like Tim, it doesn't have to be Tim, but somebody like Tim, I think there's a case for what you've just said. But the fact is that the review was not independent. The review was done by the very people who put the club in that position in the first place. So what are they going to find? Are they going to find themselves coming up short? Are they going to find themselves guilty of poor practice, of not doing things that other clubs do? I mean, our whole point about all of this is we're in this position because we can't compete with other clubs. Other clubs do what football clubs do better than we do now. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. When David Moyes was probably at his peak, we were still recognised as probably one of the best run football clubs, even including some of the top 4 or the top 6 as they were in those days. Nobody says that anymore. When Brentford come to Everton, when Brighton come to Everton, like they did last week, everybody points to them as an example of how a modern football club should be run. Nobody does that with Everton, and even them having had the internal review, and the name it actually tells you what it is. It's an internal review. It's still the same people making judgments on their own abilities. And how many times in life do you find people who actually stand there and put their hand up and say, "Yes, we got it wrong. We don't deserve to be here." It just doesn't happen. I'm not blaming them for that. I'm just saying you've got to look at the limitations of what the internal review is, and the people who did it are the people, as I say, who put the club in that position. So if their judgment was not sound before the internal review, how can one expect the findings of the review to be sound? Because it's the same people with the same experiences, with the same mindset, with the same understanding of what modern football is, which is very different from the understanding of other clubs who are making these decisions. And that's the whole point, ultimately, that Farhad Moshiri's got to recognise that the people he has, no matter how well-meaning some people might think they are, they can't compete in a modern footballing environment. And that's why there needs to be change.
I think the point you're making there about other clubs coming in and we always look at them and say that's how we do it is spot on. I used to say, we said about Leicester in the past, look how Leicester have done. Leicester have won an FA Cup, they've won a Premier League, and they look like the well run. Obviously, they're now having their constraints and their financial restraints that they've got. But I'm not getting that's not the point to me of my question on this. I think you're right in terms of other clubs and Everton, Slaughter going backwards. Standing still is going backwards. We've actually gone backwards as well as standing still. So I totally agree with that. I'm just in terms of the internal review. Again, I agree. It's marking our own homework, isn't it, to a certain extent? I think whoever you bring in, though, I suppose would still be paid by Everton to do the review. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I think maybe bringing someone from the outside, as you say, Tim Cahill or someone of that ilk to come in and have a look might have been the way to go. So, but I suppose what I'm getting at is, where would it have been if that would have worked then? In this season, we'd have been flying. What point would it is it a case of waiting until we're not successful on the pitch, and then this campaign would have come out again eventually because the fundamentals is the board, is what you're saying, and that's what you're looking to change, or that's what you're not happy with? Is it a case of waiting for the team to fail, that it was always going
to? I don't think it is, Andrew. To be fair, I think it's just a recognition that if you don't change the people, or if the people themselves don't change and there's no evidence that they have, then how can you possibly expect a better, a better outcome from whatever it is that you're doing, particularly when we sold our best player, we didn't replace him. We're evidently short of cash, even though we spent quite a bit of money towards the back end of the window. And the competition is getting stronger and stronger. I mean, I think, I'm no fan of Newcastle United, and I'm certainly no fan of Newcastle United's owners for very obvious reasons. But when you have a situation whereby a club like Newcastle has taken over and the owners come in and the owners publicly say, we actually looked at how Everton did this and we decided to do it in a very different way. And they're using Everton almost as a case study in terms of how not to take over a football club, how not to put huge sums of money into a football club. When you see that happening, then I think most reasonable people would want to see change. And the big mystery and the frustration, which is now not just a few cranks like me, but across the whole fan base, is why Farhad Moshiri doesn't appear to want to do anything about it.
I think every point you're making there, Paul, is fair, and I think it's fair to say it will resonate with lots, and it may not resonate with some, which is why it's great to have you on and talk. We've got myself, Andrew, and Gary, who you spoke to last year. We've all got our own diverse opinions on things, and I think it's fair to say we're all worried by the aspect of what may come next. I personally fear that it could really, really go the wrong way, and I'm scared by that. We did have, I'm not sure whether you checked out, we had a podcast yesterday with the fan advisory board, and one of the big topics that I tried to talk about with them was communication. And now what they did say, again, they said they're a diverse board, they have their own opinions. Away from that, they've organised 4 meetings with fans, and I think they put the details on the Twitter, which is EFC_fan advisory. If anyone wants to go and have a look where the meetings are going to be, they're both online and face to face. They said the information that they have from the fans in those meetings, that they will definitely go and present that to the club, and they're booked in with the club in February. So they were saying on the podcast, by February we'll have some sort of communication from them. Communication, I think, is a big word, Paul. It's I've seen banners that have pointed to communication. I've heard podcasts that have pointed to communication. Do you expect, because my personal opinion is I've not heard noise like this since the Blue Union, and I don't want to be disrespectful to the 27 campaign, but this noise now is massive. Do you expect the club to come out before February with some sort of communication because of the noise of the All Together Now motion?
Well, I think it'd be really interesting to see how the club responds to the sit-in that's proposed. Well, not proposed; it's planned for after the Southampton game. We've got a situation whereby, almost all fan groups. So, like the 1878 group that is responsible for atmosphere, ourselves, and as I say, over 75 other groups are all now wanting to do 2 things. They're wanting to, first of all, greet the players when they arrive back on the coach, which was never thought it was going to happen before last week. I mean, most people are sort of, I'm not saying getting tired of it, but there was a feeling that perhaps we'd done that and we needed to do something else. But a response to what happened after the Brighton game is that most fans now think that's necessary. So we're going to have a situation whereby we greet the team in the same way that we did for many of the games at the end of last season. And obviously the Goodison crowd will play its part during the game in terms of trying to get the players over the line, as we say, in what's going to be a difficult and tight game. But after that, we think that it's not just going to be a few hundred people in the Gladys Street. It's going to be literally thousands of fans from all around the ground, every part of the ground. The main stand, the parking, the lower Bullens, upper Bullens, top balcony, etc. We know from the engagement that we've had with fan groups that there are going to be thousands of fans who stay behind to express their dissatisfaction with the board, but also their dissatisfaction with Fahad Moshiri. And I stress it goes beyond communications. Yes, communications are important, and I think the fan advisory board are in a slightly difficult position because they've got to maintain a relationship with the club. So it's difficult for them if they've got personal views to express them. I understand that, but they've got a job to do. They've got a brief, which is different from what we've got. We don't have a brief. We've made our own brief, as you know. But it's no longer a brief, as I say, and I emphasise this. It's no longer a brief that's just 20 or 30 people have got an extreme view about the club. It's actually, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of fans,
massive,
who want to do something because they feel if they don't do something now, they can't trust the people who are charged with running the club. It's come to the point where, and I said it on the radio last week, this protest after the game, this sit-in, is a demonstration of support. We're acting as custodians. We're telling the people who run the club and telling the person that owns the club that they can't continue to act in the way that they are. They have to change their behavior. And I think that's going to be really, really powerful. And it's going to be fascinating to see how the club respond to it. We've had discussions with the club over the weekend, and those discussions are ongoing in terms of how the sit-in is stewarded, and what they can expect from the fan base, because there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of huge banners that are going to be put up at the end of the game.
It is a peaceful sit. Am I saying, Paul? It's a peaceful sit-in. There's not going to be any sort of aggression. It is a peaceful sit-in.
Absolutely, and we've briefed all of the fan groups to say that we don't want to do anything that we shouldn't do. We want to respect the people who are stewarding the sit-in. We want to respect those people who don't feel as if they should be in the sit-in. And we just want to make the point to Fahad Moshiri and to the board that what's going on is it's not good enough. And if it continues, and if it's not changed very, very quickly, then we're going to find ourselves in the worst possible set of circumstances that we can, which is we're going to get relegated, and we're going to get relegated at the point where we're trying to build a brand new stadium and trying to move forward. And if Fahad Moshiri can't see the critical nature of where we are now, then I'm not sure what he's doing.
Yeah, I think it's fair enough. And I presume the sit-in at the end of the game is so not to influence or not to have an effect on the team while the game's going on. I presume. And tell me if I'm wrong, but what is your opinion on those fans? Obviously, you've got a lot of support, and you mentioned there this is a massive thing now. It's thousands of people involved, and it feels like there's a movement, so there's a swell of interest in what you're trying to do. What about those fans though who say that those type of protests are not very helpful to the team at a critical stage of the season, when obviously it could go one or two ways? Is it not making things worse and compiling the pressure on the manager and on the team?
Well, first of all, I think they're entitled to their opinion, and they should be allowed to express those opinions. Yeah, just in the same way that I'm expressing mine. So I have no problem with anybody that is of that opinion. But what I would say is I think that opinion is wrong. We are doing everything that we can do to support the team before the game. Do everything that we can do to support the team during the game. And as I say, the protest in itself is an act of support, because it is saying, look, we need to do something here. We need to change the path that the club is on, because if we don't, then we are going to get relegated. If we've won one game in the last 12. If we continue along those lines, then we are going to get relegated. There's no doubt about that. Now, people might say, well, what happens if you change the board tomorrow? It doesn't make Maupe a 20 goal a game 20 goal a season player. I understand all of that, But what it will do is it will change the culture that's within the club. And part of the problems that we have is the culture that exists within the club, that it's not a culture that makes the club competitive versus our peers. So is there a risk that we disrupt the players? I think it's a very, very, very small risk. But I think the benefits of doing so, in terms of getting to Farhad Moshiri and getting him to understand how fans feel, outweigh those risks by many, many times.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think you've answered that well. I think, as I say, we've all got our own opinions. Everyone, as you said there, people are entitled to their own opinions and how they feel about it and how they would like the protest to go. Me personally, I think doing something at the end of the game is better. I wouldn't want to see us, put any pressure on the players during the 90 minutes. Certainly not if we're a goal down or whatever, and everyone's standing up and walking out. So I think a sit in at the end of the game for me is as good a way to do it as any, personally. And obviously,
there is absolutely nothing planned for during the game. So, the focus during the game is getting 3 points.
Yeah.
And
I think that was probably an issue with the 27 campaign, wasn't it? When they tried to do an in-game protest, it didn't quite come off. But yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I think a sit-in after it is definitely the way to go. I think what I'm getting for, obviously, the obvious is the Moshiri and the board, and it's not sort of aimed at the players, the manager. I get that totally. I suppose the underlying question is if the board was to change, or if there was a change to be made, how would you want that to look, or how would the movement, or whatever you want to call it, the NS now, how would that look for you? What would be success? How would you know that this protest has been successful? What would that look like?
I think you have to start right at the very top of the club. So I think Farhad Moshiri has to demonstrate that he's involved in the club. Now, whether you think Farhad Moshiri is good or bad, having an absent owner is never really a good thing. And then beyond that, it is, and this is not personal, it's not a vendetta against any individual. It's looking at the leadership of the club. So it's looking at the chair, and it's looking at the CEO in particular, because they're the people who are responsible for running the club, and asking, is it appropriate for them to continue in the roles that they are in? And the answer to that, from our perspective, is no. So I would want to see change. Now, whether that means somebody like Bill Kenwright steps down because of ill health, because clearly the man doesn't appear to be well at this moment in time, and nobody, certainly I'm not going to wish him anything other than the best in terms of his health. But it may be appropriate that a 77-year-old man who appears not to be in good health, who doesn't appear to be making the right decisions, should step down in the first instance. And if I was sitting in front of Farhad Moshiri, that's exactly what I'd be saying to him. I would then be saying, if you look at the board and the composition of the board and the composition of the executive, and if you compare them to our peers, or the people that we want to be our peers, then none of them are good enough neither. So they have to be changed. Now, clearly you can't change everybody, particularly the executive team, in a week, but you'd have to give a commitment to, or Farhad Moshiri would have to give a commitment to, we're going to change the board, we're going to change the executive, we're going to bring in external expertise, perhaps in a non-executive capacity to begin with, people who know how to turn around businesses that are failing, people who know more about modern football, and bring in modern practices to the running of the football club, in the same way that we hope Kevin Thelwell is doing as director of football, in terms of changing, the footballing structure. We need something similar in terms of how the business is run, and, as I say, how the culture of the business is seen both from the outside but also seen from the inside.
No, just really, really fascinating, and I hope a lot of people who are watching this, are listening to this, are getting as much insight as I am with this. It's really great to hear from you, Paul. We did invite some listener questions. Before we get to that, I've got a question, and I was toying with it in my own brain, because I listened to you on a a really good Spaces last week over on the Twitter, and a fan asked you a question, and I didn't like it, but then the more I thought about it, then I thought that we need these answers. So I'm sorry for anyone who's offended by this question, but if, Paul, the worst thing happens to Everton Football Club this season, and we do end up being relegated financially, are we going to be a Newcastle who will have a way of bouncing back, or is it more likely because of the finances that we're going to be a Sunderland?
It's difficult to say for definite because the accounts are so late, and they're being pushed back each year now. So you can only go on figures that are nearly over 20 months old now. But obviously, I look at this in detail.
Yeah,
I think the club would be in severe financial difficulty if we dropped into the Championship, for a number of reasons. First of all, our turnover would drop by about £90 million. So it would go from around 200 million, where it probably is now, to about 110 million pound. We'd have to sell a load of assets, and what assets can we sell? Well, it would be the players who are A, most expensive, and B, most sellable. So it would be the core of the team. It would be the Jordan Pickfords. It'd be the DCLs. It would be the Onanas. It would be a Wobie, for example. The team would change radically because we would have to sell, and not only would we have to sell, but many of those players would probably want to move on anyway because they would want to maintain their Premier League status. So we would look a very, very different club if we were to get relegated. The other point, of course, is that the club employs about 450 people. There'd be an awful lot of redundancies amongst those people if the club was to get relegated. And that's what's happened with other clubs when they've been relegated. Well, we've been in the Premier League for 30 years, so you've got all this, back revenue that we've had year in, year out, year in, year out. We're still losing money. We've lost lost money in 6 in the last 7 seasons, and we probably will lose money this season as well. So you can see the sort of difficulties that the club would be in if we were to be relegated. And I think that was reflected in the almost near panic of last year when when we were 5 points behind Burnley, with I think 5 games to go, how that affected the people who run the club. Now, they've probably had time to think about it and time to get used to it because, we're sort of 9 months on now. I'm sure they've got plans if we were to be relegated because all businesses have to have like these contingency plans, but it would make Everton a radically different club. And what the impact would be on the stadium, frankly, who knows? That would be down to whether Mashiri had the ability to continue funding it, or indeed if he wanted to continue funding it. Now, I would imagine if he has the ability to continue funding it, he would do so. But it would make a difference.
Yeah, I think it was fair to ask that because it's something that sometimes, I'll speak for myself, I'm like that. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to look at what could happen, but I think it's great for the insight because I know you on your own podcast, you talk about the financials and the business side of things. So it's great that you give that to us. We did have some fan questions. Like I said, I'm not going to give any Twitter handles out because that's not fair for me to give Twitter handles out because I know how that could possibly go. But I'll just read the questions out. First one was, can we ask your opinion on FFP? Are you in favour of it generally, or does it just give the sides with bigger revenue streams an inherent advantage?
I have a slightly different view of FFP than most people. First of all, if you run the club at break even, or if you run the club profitably, FFP is not a consideration because FFP only kicks in when you start to make losses. So that's the first thing. If you run the club properly and you run it profitably, as long as you've got the revenues, as long as you've got the player trading capabilities, you can spend as much money as you like, and I think that's fine. Secondly, I think whilst when you're in a position that Everton are in, where we've got losses, FFP is, or profitability and sustainability, as it's more accurately called in the Premier League, does make it more difficult for us to compete. What I would say is that if there were no financial regulations at all, the gap between the biggest clubs and the smaller clubs would be even greater than they are today. Now, Evertonians might say, well, that's fine because we've got Fard and Shiri, and before that we had, before the illegal invasion of Ukraine, we had USM. So we would have been one of those clubs that could have just poured money at the solution. But if FFP hadn't have existed, or profitability and sustainability hadn't have existed, the gap would have been much bigger, and it would have been a less competitive league than it is now. Now, I accept that most people don't argue that way. Most people actually argue the reverse. But that's my belief, and that's how I view it.
Okay. Second question that we've chosen to ask you. Again, hard to answer, but we'll ask you it. Was it a good idea to give Lampard the money that he has spent? I suppose you could say Lampard Thelwell was a good idea to give him as much money that he has spent. And what is your opinion on the transfer activity since the Thelwell and Lampard have came in?
Gosh, I think the club had no option really other than to give Thelwell and Lampard money. Obviously, after selling Richarlison, I mean, they sold Richarlison for two reasons. First of all, as much as he loved the club, he wanted to go because 12 months ago prior, he'd given them a commitment to another 12 months. And if we hadn't got into European football, then he wanted to continue his career and develop his career. Second reason, of course, was we had to do it for FFP reasons, which sort of is a bit counter to my argument a few seconds ago, but nevertheless, that was the case. So yeah, they had to give him some money. Have they spent it wisely? On the evidence so far, probably not. I mean, is there an Evertonian out there that's satisfied with Maupay in terms of what he's provided? McNeil, is there an Evertonian out there that's satisfied with McNeil's purchase? Probably not. I'm not. But they must have had their own reasons for doing it. I think obviously the two central defenders that we brought in, one on loan, have been a big boost. I think Garner was a mistake to bring him back. I don't think you should ever bring anybody back, to be honest with you. And Onana and Garner are just two young, promising lads who are yet unproven. And Alex Ferguson always used to say you have to give players at least 12 months to prove themselves when they come into a new country or a new division, and to ask them to be better than they are in a really struggling side is it's a real. I think it's a real difficult ask. So I think it's too early to say whether it's been a success or not. Certainly up front, it doesn't appear that it has. Will Onana become a great player? Well, he'll certainly become a good player. And most people think that James Garner will become a good player as well. So yeah, I think it's a mixed bag.
I think unfortunately we're not in the market for great players, are we? With the money we've got and the type of club we are at the minute, that's just the harsh reality of it. We're not in the market for great players. We're in the market for decent players on a budget who we can try and improve. I think that's what Garner and Onana fall into personally. But I agree, McNeil and Maupay.
Yeah.
If you've watched the Premier League the last couple of years, anyone knew that they weren't good players. But I don't mean no offence to them. I don't mean not good players. They're clearly good players, but not good enough for Everton.
I think it's when you see other teams that appear to recruit so much better than we do. So, the Brentford team that beat Manchester United was total cost of 55 million. The Brighton team last week cost less than about the same cost as Iwobi cost us. And when you see clubs like that who are obviously scouting well, and they're obviously recruiting well, and they're obviously negotiating well, it's a prime example of what we were talking about earlier in terms of how some clubs operate at the footballing level and how other clubs like us, who perhaps cruelly some people are calling us dinosaurs, we haven't got our recruitment right for years and years and years, probably since the sort of mid-term of David Moyes being here. But that's getting on for like 15 years now, sort of the late sort of 2008 2009 period. We just haven't moved on, and I think some of our problems are exemplified in how we go about recruitment, and then the recruitment decisions that we make. So yeah, I read since Moshiri's come to the club, we've bought 18 players that have cost more than £20 million. Only 6 of those players have appeared for Everton this season.
Wow, I didn't even know that's crazy.
So is that much dross we bought then, eh?
And many of those that cost more than 20 million have left on a free.
Yeah.
The list is as long as your arm. Well, not quite, but the point I'm making.
Yeah. You can look, can't you? And sometimes those things can maybe make someone who feels one way all of a sudden feel another way. It is about all sorts of the information that's out there. And again, I hope everyone who's listening and watching this is enjoying it and getting things from it. We did a few more questions. Paul, there was a guy here who started his message by saying that he was against the campaign, which is fine. We've got a duty as fans to talk about that. And what he's asked us to ask you is, look, we all know the current problem statement at the club. In your assessment or opinion, firstly, what's the root cause analysis, and what's your proposed solutions and recommendations to the hierarchy?
Well, I think to an extent I answered that earlier.
Yeah,
the root problem for me is that the board and the executive are not competitive when you compare them to the peers, and then that's to our peers, and then that's compounded by what is effectively an absent owner or a careless owner who's not doing what he should be doing to recruit properly in the boardroom. And I think that you look at any business that's struggling, and it always comes back to the people who are running the organization. The old Chinese expression that a fish rots from the head.
We had another message in from someone who was really for the campaign, and he's put, look, if Moshiri does as requested, and we do remove the board, he's fearful of what then, because us as fan base will not be able to vet who he appoints or who determines whether the replacements are competent, and what is stopping him putting in the likes of Sarvar Ismailov as a favour to a friend. Once again, I have little faith in him at all and his inputs at the football club. So without I'm reading between the lines there that the question is, do we have faith in Moshiri that if perhaps he presses a button tonight or tomorrow and there's movement, that he even brings the right replacements in?
In an ideal world, Fard Moshiri sells the club tomorrow to somebody that can meet all of our future obligations in terms of players, in terms of the stadium, in terms of our current debts. So I want to be clear about that. That's in an ideal scenario. In a less than ideal scenario, Fard Moshiri stays as owner of the club, but he makes changes at board level and chair level, as I described. And perhaps he needs to reach out and, again, use external resources to help him make better decisions. So not rely on the likes of sort of Kia Jurabachin, for example, but rely on people who, are genuinely considered to be experts and don't have a vested interest in, helping Moshiri to make various decisions as have happened in the past. So that's the second scenario, which is the sort of slightly not quite as good as the idea that he sells. And then the third scenario is where he does nothing, and that's the real disaster scenario for me.
The last question we've picked out, and again, thank you to everybody who did get us on the Twitter with the questions. We had a lot. We tried to be balanced. The last question, again, it's he said he's he's sick to death of the football club. He's been saying for a long time that Bill Kenwright is a big problem, but he's also saying he's come round to knowing that Bill isn't going anywhere. Question for the Esk: do you think relegation is now the only way that there's enough fan pressure on Bill Kenwright to walk away?
I think Bill Kenwright is immune from fan pressure. So I don't think even if we were to be relegated, it would change Bill's approach to being involved with the club and his perception that it's vital for him to be part of this club, for the club to either succeed or in the event of relegation survive. So I don't think that has any bearing on whether Bill stays or goes. The only person that has a bearing on whether Bill stays or goes, apart from Bill himself, is Farhad Moshiri. So it's his decision, and I think, as I said earlier, and I've said several times tonight, he should be making that decision sooner rather than later, and sooner means, now.
Do you know what? I couldn't really agree much more. Like I said, we are a diverse podcast. We've got our own opinions. I'm a really worried fan. I look at it, and I'm more worried now than what I was last season, than what I was 11, 12 years ago when there was a big movement. Looking on the pitch, Paul, you very, very openly talk about the finances on your own sort of social media, and you're very engaged with fans who ask the question. I'm going to ask you straight. Are you worried about the on-pitch? Let's remove ourselves from the talk of the owner and the board. On the pitch, are you worried this season? And a second question, do we have enough money in this month to change things?
I'm genuinely very worried about on the pitch, because I just don't see how we're going to score sufficient goals. One, I can't remember now what a few weeks ago I worked out that if we continue to score goals at the rate that we're scoring goals, we'd score 28 goals. I think it's less than that now. There's only ever been one incident in the Premier League where a team has scored 28 goals or less and survived, and that was Huddersfield in the first season that they came up. And I think now we're on target to score less than 28 goals. So if we don't find a solution to our goal scoring, be it Ellis Sims or be it anybody that we might bring in, perhaps on loan, and perhaps a winger, or perhaps somebody who can play at the top of the midfield, then I'm really worried, because you don't score goals, you don't win games, and it's as simple as that. Do we have the money to sort of go big in the transfer window? I personally, I don't think we have. I can see a solution in the sense that if we could buy somebody now, then we would have to sell somebody in June, just like we did last year with selling Richarlison, to counterbalance the effect of buying somebody in January. But if you're an up and coming attacker, or if you're somebody in the Premier League that is going to score 15 to 20 goals, and you happen to be playing for one of our competitors, I don't want to sound too negative, but ask yourself, why would they come to Everton at this moment in time? And I think that's how difficult the recruitment is, because those players and their agents will be looking at the situation at Everton, and that when you move jobs, you always ask, am I going to a better position than the position I'm in? Am I going to a better company? Are my prospects better at that company than they are at my current one? Who can say that about Everton if you're a 15 goal a season striker at the moment? Because we're a graveyard for strikers.
It's a lower league striker. That's what it is. It's a lower league striker who we think can play in the Premier League, and who thinks that they're good enough for the Premier League and thinks that Everton might stay up. That's our hope, I think, at the minute. Yeah. Otherwise, we're getting a striker who can't get a game for somebody who's one of our rivals. That's what.
Yeah, I know. You look around, and I look at Southampton, who are sort of in free fall, but I look at Che Adams. He'll score 6, 7, 8 goals, very, very similar to what we needed last season and got with Richarlison. And I don't, and unless we sort of keep Calvert-Lewin fit, and this system that we probably need to stick with of the 5, if that clicks between now and May, maybe, but I'm really fearful.
I think that the 5 at the back, the 3 in midfield, has to be, pretty much what we play every single game between now and the end of the season. Yeah. And we just hope that we bring, as I say, either Ellis Sims, comes to the fore, DCL stays fit, or we bring somebody else in as well. But they're fairly thin threads of hope in what is a very competitive league. Can I just make a couple of points on Ian? A couple of points that you made. One in particular. I'm always happy to talk and argue my point with people who don't necessarily agree with me, and I'm always happy to hear their view, because I think it's really important as a football club and as a fan base that we can all express our own views and our own opinions. And I think you said at the beginning, didn't you, that nobody's wrong on this podcast? Well, it's probably changed after me being on tonight, because quite a lot of people still think I'm wrong. But I think it's just really important to talk these things through.
Yeah.
And to be, mature about it. And we're all Evertonians. We all want the same thing. We don't have to agree with each other. We don't even have to like each other. This is not a popularity campaign in any sense. It's just we all want what we think is best for the club, and we all want to do it in a way that we think is best for the club, which is what this campaign is about. And as I say, partly because of a slight change in the way that we're doing the campaign, but I think more driven by events, more driven by what happened at the Brighton game, that we've had this, amazing swell of support, all based on people's fear for what the club is about to become, if it's not already.
I think you're spot on. I think you're absolutely spot on. And we always start the podcast. We tend not to get too angry, apart from on our instant match reactions. But I think the point that I made, and you picked up on there, I don't think any Evertonian is wrong. I think it's all about opinions. And if some Evertonians don't join the All Together Now movement and the protest, then that's absolutely fine. It's also fine for a number of Evertonians to join it and to voice what they want to do as well. And that's why I want you to come on and talk to both sides, really. So it's been really great to have you back on. Pricey, have you got any more to add, or are you ready for your
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I just want to say both sides and all that, whatever side you are, but I think it's commendable that people are actually trying to do something about it and actually trying to make the voice heard. So whether you agree with the way it's working, the way that you disagree, whatever it is, I think you've got to be commended for actually having a go and trying to be heard and trying to make changes to the club that's been run appallingly over the last 5 or 6 years, however long it's been now.
I think the other point, just to finish, is that nobody has all the good ideas. The good ideas are all out there. They're spread amongst the fan base, and it is, it's only by talking to people, and it's only by engaging with people and asking people's opinions that those good ideas come out. So it's really important that we keep talking to each other, that we keep expressing our views, and put forward solutions.
Absolutely.
It's the only way we can do it.
It's been great, Paul, and we really appreciate you. You're friends of the show. It's not your first time on the show. We really appreciate you giving us
might be the last
an hour of your time, and to look at me and Pricey for an hour must be really, really painful. We've been ill, as you can see. We look really, really sick, so we commend you for doing that. The hashtag and the Twitter is down at the bottom for the NSNOW or NS Now, however you want to call them. NSNO_W on Twitter. I'm very, very active. And they do engage and reply to fans. We're an example of that. We've touched base and got a reply. Do you want to plug anything, Paul? I know there's the peaceful protest at the Southampton game. Is there any more that you can maybe give us? I know fans have been really kind with donations to banners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the donation, the GoFundMe was not us. That's a separate group of Evertonians. Okay. But they're boys and girls, or men and women, who go home and away week in, week out, and they're all people that will be known to most Evertonians. I think two things: we have to support the club in the way that we have been supporting the club for many, many years, and particularly the last sort of 9 months or so. But we also have to be more demanding of the people that are running the club. If we want to have a successful football club, and we can't see a route by those people, from those people who are running the club, then we have to say so. And there should be no shame in doing that. I mean, look, we all want the same thing, and if we're not getting it from the owner, then we have to take on board that responsibility ourselves to get the owner to do it. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. It's Paul, thank you so much once again for joining Across the Park podcast. The Twitter is at below. Like I said, it's NSNO_W. Fans who want better, fans who put their name on wanting better, whether you agree or you disagree, we really hope you've got something from this podcast. Paul, once again, Happy New Year, and thanks once again for joining Across the Park podcast.
No, pleasure. Thanks very much.